Hey, Donna.
Hi, Al. I'm very enthusiastic about the conversation that we're going to have shortly, continuing from our last podcast, talking about how emotions are made and seeing how that dovetails with the Feldenkrais method.
Well, I am too. I'm really excited about this topic. We're going to talk about a key element that Lisa Feldman Barrett talks about in her book, How Emotions Are Made, which is this notion of the prediction error correction. This idea that we're always going through a process from early development, this is part of our developmental learning process, of the brain making predictions and then trying something and again getting a result. And either it's going to match or it's going to mismatch the prediction. And if it's a mismatch, that's the learning state. It has to make an adjustment in the brain and the nervous system based on that feedback.
You know, as you say that, it might be useful for our listeners and for us to remember too that our brain is an anticipatory organ. That's the way it's frequently talked about in neuroscience. So that's the job of your brain, is to anticipate. And that's part of this process. It's the prediction of what is going to happen next that's based on the past. So we're imagining in nanoseconds. We don't take a long time to do this. It's instantaneous. And then we are in what's happening, and then we make a modification with our perception to see if what we, in our nanosecond, imagine would happen. And the literature says that the more flexible you are and adaptable, the quicker that you're capable of understanding your prediction and either seeing the error in it or understanding that that is what's happening and going on to the next prediction. And this is going on so rapidly. Now, I think it's a very interesting topic because we do this all the time, even with our sight. So if you walk into your garden today, for example, before you actually see what's in your garden, you're going to bring a snapshot of what you have seen before in your garden. And it's not unless you actually understand that this is happening that you can take a breath and really see what is in front of you.
So it's kind of like you're saying, we have, I think Feldman Barrett called it a simulation, right?
Yes.
So you have this imagined experience. So you're going to walk out into your garden and you have this simulation in your mind of what your garden's going to look like. And you get out there and maybe it looks like that. And maybe it's changed a little bit. Maybe something has changed in the garden. A new flower has opened up. Mm-hmm. Or maybe there's more bees on your blue mist spirea than there were yesterday, and you see those differences.
Yeah. Have you ever had the experience of walking into your garden and seeing that there's a large blooming flower there? And you go, oh my gosh, look at that beautiful flower. And then think, that flower did not open up this morning or last night. It had to have been moving in that direction for days. And I never saw it before this moment, a full bloom.
Well, if anybody's grown zucchini, you know this experience too. That you go out there, you've looked at the zucchini plant, and you've looked around for all the zucchinis and you've been pulling them off. And then one day there's just like 2-3 foot zucchini there. Of course, it's been there all the time, right? And you're like, whoa, where did this 3-foot zucchini come from?
Yeah, that's crazy. So now let's talk a little bit about how we apply this to movement. So historically, I had a pain in my foot. And I don't have that pain anymore. I figured out how to move and not have that pain. And I also have found shoes that give me just the right support so that I don't have that pain. But there was a time when every time I decided to go for a walk, I would look for the pain. It was immediate because I figured it was going to be there and I usually found it. And then enough times of walking with the good shoes and support and reorganizing my self-use, I no longer look for the pain, but I can remember the pain. And so we go through this process in our sensory systems, whether it be our sensations and movement, or with our vision, and even our hearing.
There's a couple of examples. You're talking about movement and prediction, error correction. So here's a couple of examples, or at least one example that comes to mind. It's like, we've all had this experience too. So we're walking along and we step off a curb and it's deeper than we expect. And it's a surprise because we had a prediction about what it was going to be like to step off this curb, but yet it turned out to be steeper. And so there's a sudden correction we have to make for our balance and our organization, coordination to keep ourselves from falling.
Mm-hmm.
And there's other situations like that too, where we're interacting with our environment. We have an expectation about how something is going to go, and then there's a mismatch for it. And so we have to make a sudden correction so we're not falling or tripping or something like that. And a lot of accidents happen like this for people.
It makes me remember an accident that I had where I misjudged the depth of the step. There were about 8 stairs, so it wasn't a long staircase, but I had new bifocals. And so I looked down and I didn't know how to use my head properly to look over the top of the bifocals, and I misstepped and I slipped and slid down those stairs. Fortunately, I did not injure myself badly, but it was such a shock that for many months after that fall, every time I approached walking downstairs, I felt so insecure.
Yeah, it's interesting. So there was a prediction that, your brain went, stairs, we got to watch out. So that fall you took when you had that error prediction mismatch and you misstepped and you fell down the stairs, then your brain is predicting now falling down the stairs. And how did you get out of it? How did you change your brain, your expectations, so that now you can do stairs without any issue?
Well, I did it very conscientiously using the Feldenkrais method. I would slow down, look at the stairs, take my steps very carefully. At that time, I was wearing glasses, so I would make sure that I was looking over the bifocal part of the lens, and I held onto the railing because I did not want to fall again. And then I had enough experience with staircases, that I stopped having that prediction. And the feeling, I think as Feldenkrais practitioners, we're so sensitive to our sensations and how we react that it can be overwhelming to approach something like walking downstairs and feel like, oh my God, I'm going to fall. Oh my God, I'm going to fall. It's a terrible experience.
Yeah, so you very intentionally, you built experiences, or you created a number of experiences for yourself of being safe, of being comfortable. And now you don't have that experience, right? You can walk up and down stairs without any issue.
Yes, and it's a lot of fun, actually. Yeah. I do pay attention, though. We have big stairs here on the beach to get down to the bottom from the cliff to the ocean. And I like going up and down the stairs. And I really do pay attention because I don't want to fall again. But I'm not afraid anymore. So there's a difference. I'm not afraid of falling. I just want to know where my feet are and how I'm moving.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting example. So there's these examples of us interacting with our environment where there's a mismatch, and we can start to be intentional about what kind of predictions we create for ourselves. Some of that can be really intentional and conscious. And then other kind of prediction error corrections are more unconscious. We're not thinking about it. We're not paying attention to it. We're not even aware of it. And those are the things that are going on all the time, adjusting our balance. It could be based on what we've been eating, what's going on around us, the sounds in the environment. If we hear a siren in the background, or music or something, there's all these things that we're always making these small, tiny adjustments. So it's happening at a very small level, an unconscious level, it can happen at a very large, and conscious level of experience. And we can interact with all of those. We do that in Feldenkrais lessons and functional integration and awareness through movement.
As you say that, I'd like to invite our listeners to notice their breathing and to notice if whether you're sitting or you're standing or walking, whatever you may be doing, just to notice your breathing and think about lengthening your spine and sense your head at the top of your spine. And then let your jaw rest a little bit and your tongue rest a little bit. Even sense your eyes and see what it's like to soften your gaze, soften your focus. Notice your breathing again as you begin to pay attention to yourself. And then bring your attention down, down, down to your pelvis, down into your legs, and sense your feet so that you are moving into this sensory motor playground. And notice yourself now. What has changed? How are you now compared to just a moment ago? Do you notice the difference, Al?
Well, I have a much quieter sense of self. So my attention has been lowered down to the pelvis, down to my, what I call it, dantian, the pelvic area, and so more weighted down there. And the room seems quieter, which is interesting.
Your voice has changed.
My voice has changed.
The resonance of your voice has dropped from my hearing down a little into your chest, maybe. I wonder if you sense that.
I do. And the tempo slowed a little bit.
Yeah, and I am aware that I was doing it as I was speaking, that I can hear better.
Interesting. So how is this an example of what we're talking about? Let's make it explicit.
Well, let's see if we can make sense out of it. So we reduced our muscular effort in a way with our self-awareness, with our breathing. The neuromuscular activation that was happening before excitation has decreased. We know that doing this kind of thing does alter the inner ear muscles, and the eyes have to do with sight as well as the orientation of the head. So we just altered our state. And so I'm wondering if when you're in a different state, if your predictions are different. What do you think about that?
I think that's true. And I think that you guiding us through that process used implicitly that prediction error correction process to bring us into a different state of being. So we weren't explicitly finding errors, but by guiding and changing the state, we're just bringing the attention down into the breath and then down into the pelvis, created a different organization. And that asked us to recalibrate to our environment, to how things sound, to the tempo and the pace of things. And so it was a recalibration based on that state that we created.
And so in this newly calibrated state, the way that we're anticipating has changed.
Yeah.
I've never talked this through in this way before, and I think this is very exciting.
I haven't either, but I love it. So let's talk a little bit about how this takes place. Let's talk more explicitly about how this takes place in like Feldenkrais lessons.
Okay.
Like Feldenkrais would often say, make lots of mistakes, right? And that's kind of a big example of prediction error correction, right? He's saying, go ahead, make mistakes, mismatch your predictions, and you'll automatically begin to start making correction to your predictions. You think that's right?
Yes, and maybe we could do a little movement depending on where our listeners are at. You could do it now or you could do it later. So if you're standing or sitting, turn and notice you're turning. How far do you turn? Easily without straining, stretching. And now look to the other side and see how far you turn easily and how much of you is participating. Your head, your shoulders, your spine, your pelvis. If you're standing, maybe down to your feet. And now let's do a variation. Bring your arms forward and bring the palms of your hands together. Touch your hands. That's it. And now leave your arms straight. So they're lengthened and the palms of your hands are staying in contact like they're glued. And now move your hands to the left and back to the middle. That's it. So when you move your hands to the left, follow your hands with your eyes. Your nose is following your hands to the left and back to the middle. Observe your breathing. And let's do a variation. Leave your nose forward. Move your hands to the left and follow your hands with your eyes. So we're differentiating the movements. Make a small movement, very easy movement. So your nose is forward, your hands are moving to the left, your eyes are moving to the left with your hands, and then back to the middle. And notice your breathing. That's it. And now rest with your arms down along your sides. And now turn to the left and notice how you turn. No, just with your arms down, just simply with your arms resting down, turn and see what's happening. Did you go a little farther? You sure, I can see you, Al, and you sure did.
I did. I turned 180 degrees around myself. Unbelievable.
So now just for the heck of it, turn to the right. Leave your arms resting and just look to the right and see how has that changed.
Actually, that improved as well. That's curious.
Yeah, well, you learned something about turning.
Yeah. So I had a really interesting experience when you're guiding us through that. So when you had us do this differentiation between the head, the eyes, and the arms, so the head stays forward and the eyes follow the hand, my first impulse was to I did a bigger movement than I could actually do. So there was this prediction that I could do it, that I could keep my head forward and I can move the arms and my eyes to the left. But it was a mistake. I made a mistake there because it was too big and I couldn't make that differentiation. So I had to make it smaller and slower. So when I made it smaller and I made it slower, then I can make that differentiation. So that was another example of that prediction, error, correction. That happened spontaneously in the lesson. And you did see me do that, and you offered a suggestion in response to what you saw, which is another part of what we do in these lessons. As we're watching our students, we're interacting with them all the time. We use our hands or use our language to guide and help create these learning situations.
That's right. And that process that you described that you are familiar with was immediately available to you. And we create that availability in our students so they may not be as versed in doing a Feldenkrais movement lesson. But in time, we all begin to apply what we know in activities throughout the day. So we go slower, we're more gentle, we prevent ourselves from pushing through discomfort, and we look for the more efficient, easy way to do things. And that's a life-changing, useful process. And it has to do with what we're discussing today in terms of prediction, correction, prediction, error, and also simulating life experiences in this ongoing way.
Yeah. It's interesting, very interesting process. Then, of course, the big change was at the end. And that was one of the tended things about doing this little lesson was be able to turn more easily just by making the simple differentiation. That's almost like prediction, correction, epiphany when that happens. It's like, because you do this little process and then suddenly it's like, wow, you can turn so much further. And it happens throughout all kinds of lessons we do. You know, this is one of the things that excites me about as a practitioner because it happens in all ATMs and all functional integration lessons that I'm still thrilled with it. You know, I do a process with somebody and I do some variations and come back to a reference movement and wow, it's different. And it's still a thrill. And it's like an epiphany for me and for my students when that happens.
I hear the excitement in your voice as you share your experience. And that excitement we often translate into emotional experience of surprise, optimism, hope. So we're flooded with these wonderful positive emotions. They're pleasure emotions. And then we, of course, we come up with words to be a little bit more granular in the description of what we're experiencing. But that kind of surprise is so delightful.
Yeah, it is. And if we tied it back to where we kind of started with this discussion, you mentioned having an injury with your foot, a sore foot for a while. And so in these lessons, one of the key things about how they help us move away from discomfort and into comfort is by generating these really pleasant sensations. So we're constantly in these lessons moving away from difficult and painful into easy and comfortable. Mm-hmm. That's a key process of what we're doing. It's how we engage this whole prediction, error, correction process, so that we're basically, the error becomes the discomfort and the correction becomes the comfort. And this is woven throughout all of our lessons that we do.
And we are priming ourselves, our attention, our brain, our nervous system to look for pleasure and ease. And, maybe we'll actually close our podcast today with that and talk about that next time. Pleasure.
That sounds like a great idea. And if you want to find more pleasure, go to our websites. You can download lessons. We have a lot of options for you to do some home exploration. Also, Donna teaches classes. I teach classes. And you can find all of Donna's stuff, donnaray.com, all my stuff at achievingexcellence.com. And of course, this podcast at feldenkraisforlife.com. So check it out. And, go to Apple and leave us a 5-star review. We'd love to hear that.
Thanks so much for listening. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.